Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees. And please put a review on my podcast. That will certainly help in getting the word out there and creating more listenership. Episode 290, The Embezzler, Part 2. It seems that May was the only surviving child of Henry and Mabel. May was born in about 1894. In the Sydney Morning Herald on the 28th of October 1911, at the YMCA Hall, says first vocal recital by Miss May Geary, contralto. Mr. W. Burns Walker will introduce the student with a beautiful contralto voice in the person of Miss May Geary, whose public debut is listed for the 27th of November. And then after the event, Miss May Geary, a new contralto, tall, of pensive face with masses of brown hair falling over her shoulders, was introduced by Mr. Burns Walker at a concert at the YMCA Hall last night and warmly greeted. She has a fine voice, it's rich and full with great possibilities, but she still has a good deal to learn with the art of producing it. Its compass is exceptional and its quality, whether in heavy low tones or in a high mezzo range, is excellent. There is plenty of volume in the voice, and some of the notes of the middle range could easily be developed more fully, so that a smoother technique should be attained without any difficulty. The singer was received with decisive applause, repeated encores having to be responded to. And another account on the 22nd of November 1911 in the Sydney Mail. Mr. W. Burns Walker brought forward a pupil of remarkable gifts, Miss May Geary. This young lady, who has a pleasing platform presence, possesses a magnificent contralto voice, the beautiful quality of which created surprise and delight. It has been well trained, and as Miss Geary possesses a requisite temperament, coupled with the intelligence and a capacity for hard work, she should make a name for herself as a singer. She is a young girl of not more than 20, and she has the most extraordinary voice. Miss Geary was clad in an airy-fairy gown of white chiffon, and her fluffy golden hair surrounded her face in the wax doll style. Miss Geary is so much above the average that the contrast between her Clara Butt voice and her Nellie Stewart appearance was quite marked. On the 4th of September 1912, in the New South Wales Police Gazette, stolen from Mossman between 5:50 and 6:30 p.m. from the residence of Valentine Geary, a gold medal, size of the half-crown, blue enamel centre, has engraved on the back, presented to Miss May Geary by the Estedford at Johannesburg, 1906. On the 12th of September 1913, in the Fremantle Herald of Western Australia, at King's Theatre in South Terrace, 2 farewell appearances of the Lancaster Opera Company, and Miss May Geary as contralto is one of the performers. She's then in South Australia on the 10th of December 1913, and the Borough Record says, "It is clean, humorous and entertaining to both young and old, Miss May Geary contralto." The next day they're at Strathalbyn in South Australia, the Dandies. The young contralto, Miss May Geary, has a pleasing voice, but her singing will be better when she blends her registers better and enunciates more clearly. In part work she is a valuable asset as it is, and should become a popular artiste. They're then in Hamilton, Victoria in January 1914, then Warrnambool, then in Tasmania at Launceston and then Hobart, and then back to Victoria where they're in Ballarat in October 1914. The Evening Echo of Ballarat says the Violet Dandies opened to a season last night at the Mechanics Institute to a well-filled house. The company is versatile and clever, and during 2 hours that they're on the boards, kept a large audience amused, interested and entertained. The concerted singing was on the whole very good, the company being well balanced. Miss May Geary has a nice contralto voice, very sweet, and she sings her songs well. They then went on to Adelaide from October 1914 to March 1915. In the Adelaide Critic on the 28th of October 1914, Miss Kate Checkett, part of the Dandies, had a chat with the journalist and said, "Miss May Geary, Mr. George Brooke and myself are all that is left of the original Violet Dandies." On the 18th of November 1914, the Adelaide Critic interviews May. 5 minutes with Miss May Geary of the Violet Dandies. Miss May Geary, whose striking resemblance to Miss Nellie Stewart, Australia's prettiest actress, has often been remarked upon, called in for a chat. "As a Belgian, you reduced your audience to tears," we told her. "It made me feel like that myself," replied Miss Geary. "Quite a new line, but I have a great leaning towards drama." "Have you been on the stage prior to becoming a dandy?" "Only as an amateur in South Africa, where I have lived all my life, although born in Melbourne. I was a member of an amateur opera company and took the principal part in Faust and Rigoletto, but my first desire was to be an artist. I studied painting under the best teachers in South Africa and developed great ability in portrait painting, both oil and watercolour." "What made you give it up?" "It seemed an unsociable sort of life, spending all of your days shut up in a room by yourself, so I took up singing." "And do you prefer it?" "Yes, I think I do, especially this dandy work among congenial companions. It is delightful. We're like a big family of brothers and sisters. No jealousy or unpleasantness of any kind." "Are you staying in a hotel?" "No, I have the dearest little flat in Mrs. Power Stewart's house on North Terrace. Raffles, my dearest little white French poodle, and myself have it all to ourselves. A friend of mine won him in a raffle when he was a puppy at only 3 months old, and that's why I called him Raffles, as they were leaving Australia and they gave him to me. I am collecting Japanese furniture for my room. Anything pretty I see in Japanese I buy immediately. I've had the pleasure of meeting Madame Melba already and Madame Clara Butt. Mr. Tate kindly introduced me to Madame Clara Butt, and she heard me sing and was very pleased with my voice. I liked her immensely, and also Madame Kirby Lunn. She is a perfect dear, and she also expressed herself as charmed with my vocal ability." On the 27th of March 1915 in the Adelaide Mail, "Patrons of the Dandies will hear with much regret of the approaching departure of Miss May Geary from the company. Miss Geary made her final appearance tonight and will leave for Sydney next week to take up dramatic work. Those who have seen her excellent performance in several of the concert items, notably the Flags of All Nations, where she plays the part of a Belgian mother, the Snake Charmer and the Persian Slave, will have no hesitation in prophesying for Miss Geary a successful career. She has much in her favour, a large share of good looks, an abundance of temperament, youth, and a beautifully rich speaking and singing voice, and her going away will be a distinct loss to the dandies and their audiences." On the 7th of April 1915, the Adelaide Critic said that she had left yesterday for Melbourne and she had been the guest of Mrs. Reg Gooden during the past week. On the 16th of March 1917, in the South Coast Times and Wollongong Argus, it announced the grand opening night of the concert season, one of the great combinations of star artists ever presented to an audience, and Miss May Geary, contralto, is amongst the list. On the 16th of May 1917, the Sydney Morning Herald announced at Empire Day in the Town Hall that Miss May Geary was one of the artists. May heads over to New Zealand, and in the Otago Daily Times on the 8th of June 1918 at the Princess Theatre, it says the Walter George Company reached town on Thursday and are busily rehearsing their open production on Monday night, which is entitled Seaside Frolics. Mr. George has a reputation that extends far beyond the colonies, having played many important comedy and singing roles in the Gilbert and Sullivan Opera at the Savoy Theatre, London. The new company is particularly strong in the singing side, including, as it does, such eminent vocalists, and then it says Miss May Geary, contralto. In all, there are 14 musical numbers, including 2 fine quartets. The comedy side is in the hands of Mr. George, Miss Martin and Miss Geary. And in the Littleton Times on the 11th of August 1919, it says the Opera House was filled to overflowing last evening on the occasion of a sacred concert held in aid of the Catholic Schools Building Fund. The program was an excellent one, the performers comprising some of the best local talent in the city, and Miss May Geary of the Fuller vaudeville circuit appeared by permission of the Fuller management. She's still in New Zealand in March 1920 when the Otago Daily Times announced that at the Princess Theatre, The King of Dunaweski, the title of the new revue, serves further to demonstrate the ability and versatility of Walter George and his Sunshine Players. Miss May Geary, Miss Hilda Shannon and Miss Georgie Martin sing the numbers allotted to them in first-class style. In the Evening Post on the 16th of November 1920 at His Majesty's, it says of the newcomers on the Fuller stage last night, a crowded audience gave quite an ovation. The singing of Hilda Shannon, May Geary, Georgie Martin and Dulcie Milner all contributed to one of the most amusing musical revues yet staged by this company. She is still playing at the Princess Theatre, and in the Evening Star on the 15th of February 1921, it says, this is the last week of Walter George's Sunshine Players, and the Orange Girl was chosen as their farewell offering. Hilda Shannon and May Geary were the real ladies who had sought refuge from society's whirl in the Orange Grove, and they were quite adequately stately, not to say standoffish. Then there were duets by Hilda Shannon and May Geary, Glorious Spring. She's back in Australia by the 28th of November 1921 when the Newcastle Morning Herald and Miners Advocate announced that at the Victoria and Herbert's theatres, Miss May Geary will appear at all three theatres, opening her engagement on Saturday. She has a beautiful contralto voice, which was heard to great advantage in several songs, My Curly-Headed Baby being especially effective. On the 2nd of December, it's advertising her at the Victoria Theatre, and it says special vocal attraction. Newcastle music lovers will have the opportunity of listening to Miss May Geary, New Zealand's famous contralto and new songs. On the 11th of February 1922, in the Brisbane Daily Standard, Tivoli Special at Haymarket Theatres will present Miss May Geary, the well-known Sydney mezzo-soprano, at the Tivoli Theatre on Monday. Miss Geary is a very attractive vocalist specialising in the more popular ballads. This is her first visit to Brisbane and her season will be of short duration. On the 6th of March 1922, in the Toowoomba Chronicle, it announces at the Strand and Princess, two magnificent programs, Miss May Geary, Australia's leading soprano. In the Darling Downs Gazette on the 7th of March 1922, last night Miss May Geary, a young and celebrated soprano singer who's just completed a lengthy and most successful season at the Tivoli in Brisbane, made her debut to a Toowoomba audience at the Princess Theatre. Miss Geary is a possessor of a wonderful voice, having a wide range in clearness and sweetness of tone, which is rare, and she charmed her audience with her wonderful singing. She stayed in Brisbane until April 1922, then she went up to Maryborough in Queensland. Miss May Geary possesses a charming cultured contralto voice, rich and full and very expressive, in which she used to a marked degree of artistry For My Life Is Love and other of equally effective numbers, whilst both reaching a particularly high standard in the duet. Then she went to Rockhampton and then back to Brisbane by October 1922. By June 1923 she's back in Sydney, then she went back to Brisbane by the October, and by June 1924 was touring Queensland with the Lionel Walsh Musical Opera Company. The company then progressed into New South Wales by August 1924, then travelled through Victoria and into South Australia by January 1925, and then toured Tasmania in the February. They were in Broken Hill on the 2nd of January 1925, last two nights of Lionel Walsh's popular comic opera company, The Maid of the Mountains, proclaimed last night by a huge audience as the most beautiful comic opera played during the season, and May Geary was part of the cast. On the 23rd of August 1926, they're in Melbourne. The Argus states, as a pantomime dame at the Bijou Theatre, Miss May Geary's contralto voice was heard in two solo numbers. By March 1927, she was back in Brisbane at the Empire Theatre and was there until the August. On the 22nd of September 1927 in the Newcastle Sun, commencing at the matinee at the Victoria Theatre next Saturday, The Honeymoon Girl will be presented. Miss May Geary in the role of the Honeymoon Girl. Her stage graces and attractive mezzo-soprano voice won her much favour in the role of Julotte. Her singing impressed the audience because of her fine vocal quality, and in the finale of the reception room scene, Miss Geary fully shared in the dramatic climax. On the 2nd of December 1927 in the Perth Weekly Judge, Miss May Geary is making her first appearance in Western Australia, and this delightful soprano, who, by the way, is an asset to the reviews included in the programs, played principal parts throughout Australia prior to coming to the West during the week. Quite recently she was with Jim Gerald's review company, and at present playing to record business in Sydney. Miss Geary has a rich contralto voice and is an added attraction to the long list of artists appearing at the Luxor. She is a mezzo-soprano of distinct merit and has done well in Eastern reviews. On the 18th of December 1927 in the Perth Sunday Times, Miss May Geary, the sweet contralto now at the Luxor, is a niece of city analyst Billy Geary. Miss Geary is also the possessor of a beautifully modulated speaking voice. She recently completed a successful engagement with the Jim Gerald Review Company of Sydney and is a native of Melbourne and has been on the Australian stage since an early age. On the 6th of July 1946 in the Sydney Morning Herald, it says Miss May Geary of Glenmore Road, Edgecliff, wishes to convey her sincere thanks to relatives, friends and neighbours for their kind sympathy, floral tributes, cards and telegrams in her recent great loss of her beloved mother. Please accept this as a personal thanks. and I'm unable to find any records of May Geary after this point. And a little on Henry Valentine Joseph Geary's siblings. His sister Mary Annie was born in 1859 in Richmond but died at the age of 6 in 1866. The second was Annie Jane Geary, who was born in Richmond in 1861. She was a spinster and lived in East Camberwell and died on the 21st of February 1949. Her will stated that she was to pay my debts, including the sum of £200, which I owe to my brother Frederick William Geary, the funeral and testamentary expenses payable on my estate. I give my niece, May Geary of Sydney, the old china plate brought by my grandfather from China and my black plaque of Madonna. She gave £250 to the Society for the Propagation of Faith in memory of myself and deceased relatives and friends, to the Superior of the Missionaries of the Sacred Heart in Kensington, New South Wales, £100 for the benefit of Australian missions, to the President of the Society of St Peter Apostle, £30, the parish priest of the Church of Immaculate Conception in Hawthorn, £30 for masses for the repose of my soul and souls of my deceased relatives. To the President of the Propagation of Faith, £20 to aid the erection of a mission church. To the President of the Holy Childhood Society, £20. To the Sisters of the Carmelite Convent in Kew, £20. To the Convent of St John of God of Broome in Western Australia, £10. Presentation Convent Windsor, £10. Florence Margaret Scully of Burwood, £10. Nazareth House in Camberwell, £10. The Society of St Peter Claver in East Melbourne, £5. Sisters of Carmelite Monastery in Kew, £5. The Superior Franciscan Friars in Waverley, New South Wales, £5 for the perpetual membership in the Crusade of the Holy Land. The Hawthorn branch of St Vincent de Paul Society, £5. The Hawthorn branch of the Catholic Women's Social Guild, £5. And the Regina Coeli Hostel in North Melbourne, £5. Another sister, Edith Jane Mary Geary, was born in 1864. She was appointed Acting Registrar of Births and Deaths in Dunkeld on the 10th of July 1900 in Victoria. On the 1st of March 1906 in the Ballon Times, it says that Edith Jane Mary Geary will be relieving postmistress residing at Hawthorn to take charge of the Ballon Post Office. Edith died unmarried at the age of 54 in 1918 in Surrey Hills, Victoria. Her death notice says, on the 23rd of July 1918, at her residence in Surrey Hills, Edith Jane Geary, third beloved daughter of the late Joseph Geary, Inspector of Schools, and Annie Geary. In her will, she gave her brother, Frederick William Geary, generally known as William Geary of Perth, Western Australia, £100, to be paid to him within 5 years of her death, or out of the proceeds of the sale of her land at Deepdean. She gives her sister Annie Mary Geary of Surrey Hills the whole of her real and personal estate, valued at £218, 3 shillings and 3 pence. Another sister, Elizabeth Mary Emily, was born in Richmond in 1862. She died unmarried, aged 42, in Hawthorn in 1905. It says on the 5th of April 1905 of Glenferrie, Elizabeth Emily Mary Geary, dearly beloved daughter of Annie and the late Joseph Geary, journalist, formerly Inspector of Schools. Another sister, Ada Josephine Mary Geary, was born in Melbourne in 1865, but she died at 4 months old. A brother, Frederick William, known as William, was born in 1875 in Victoria. On the 11th of March 1908, in the Perth Daily News, it states that William Geary was employed at the Government Analysts and was living in Lake Street. On the 30th of September 1911, in the Perth Daily News, in the State Service, the following appointments were William Geary to be Assistant Analyst of Explosives and the Analytical Branch of the Mines Department, a salary of £150 per annum. On the 30th of September 1917, in the Kalgoorlie Sun, a wedding of interest to many was celebrated at St Mary's Church in Perth recently. Mr William Geary of the Government Analyst Staff married Miss Sarah Emily Ramsey of Perth. Mr Geary has recently been appointed City Analyst and will take up his duties at an early date. Miss Ramsey was formerly on the goldfields. William died in 1944 in Perth, aged 70. His death notice states, on the 18th of December 1944, suddenly at Perth, William, loved husband of Emily Geary of Maylands, and it states in his funeral notices that he was the analyst to the Perth City Council. He was also a member of the Civil Services Club of Western Australia and was a highly esteemed foundation and life member of the Australian Chemical Institute. and his wife Sarah died on the 29th of October 1947. They had no children. Now, interestingly, there was a reference to Henry Geary's brother in his Victorian jail record, and it says that his brother was George Kilfoyle. In George Kilfoyle's Victorian record, it states that he was born on the 21st of September 1874, which is quite plausible as there is a 10-year break between his sister Ada and his brother Frederick William. And Henry himself was born in 1868. So it says in George Kilfoyle's record that he was born in Victoria and he was a labourer, and he was convicted on 2 charges, one in July 1892 and one in August 1892, of larceny, housebreaking and shopbreaking. Stated he was single and that his father was Mr. Joseph Geary of Canterbury and his brother was the prisoner H.V. Geary. So he received 1 month's imprisonment on the first count, then 3 years hard labour on each count concurrent, with the first week of every alternate month and of the second year, and the last 3 months of detention in solitary confinement. On the 30th of June 1892 in the Melbourne Age, it outlined the case. A raid was made by police of Prahran and Kew on Tuesday night on a dwelling occupied by several well-known characters in Albert Park. George Kilfoyle and Alice Green were arrested on charges of housebreaking. A large quantity of stolen property recovered. Another man managed to escape, choosing to run the risk of being shot by Constable Wilcock, whose arm was knocked up by one of the prisoners as he was about to fire at the runaway's legs. The Prahran plainclothes police have had a gang with whom Kilfoyle's been associated under surveillance for some weeks. The gang were in the habit of meeting at Splodge's boot shop in Prahran, where Kilfoyle was traced to a house in Nelson Place. But finding too much attention was paid to him, he and Green shifted to Albert Park. Being suspected of a robbery at Kew, they were followed to their new abode. 2 men, one being Kilfoyle, returned to the house at midnight, but on the appearance of the police, Kilfoyle gave the alarm to his mate. The woman Green was in his house and she and Kilfoyle were arrested. The house was searched and part of the proceeds of 4 big robberies and a large quantity of stolen jewellery was recovered. On the 14th of July 1892 in the Melbourne Herald, in the Prahran court, George Kilfoyle, alias Geary, and Alice Green were placed on the dock on a charge of breaking into the dwelling of J. Penman in Chatsworth Road and stealing jewellery and money valued at £40. A portion of the property was discovered at a house occupied by the prisoner at Albert Park. Prisoners on this charge were committed for trial, and on a charge of stealing an overcoat, Kilfoyle received a month, while Green received 3 months for vagrancy. On the 12th of June 1892 in the Melbourne Age, a prisoner named George Kilfoyle, alias Geary, endeavoured to escape from custody whilst being escorted from the Melbourne jail to the Prahran court on Friday morning. He was one of 4 prisoners in charge of Constable Crimmins and White. While Constable White was securing tickets at the Flinders Street railway station, he slipped the handcuff over his hand and made off. White followed in pursuit and ran him into a cellar in Queen Street, where he recaptured him. With Alice Green, Kilfoyle was later placed in the dock at the Prahran court and charged with housebreaking. The police applied for remand, stating that there would be fully a dozen charges preferred against the accused. An application by Mr. Graves for bail was granted, securities required being 2 of £250 each, and the accused in a like sum. And George was released on the 15th of December 1894 by remission. On the 25th of July 1895 in the Mercury and Weekly Courier in Melbourne, there is reference to a George Kilfoyle described as a Sunday drunk, who was fined 2 shillings and 6 pence, and this seems to be in Fitzroy. And that's the last that I find of George Kilfoyle or George Geary. So I hope you enjoyed the interesting story of the embezzler, Henry Valentine Joseph Geary. If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.